Okay, I'm just gonna talk about FF7 Remake a bit and why I think it's not a good game. If they are remaking a game from an older game like the original FF7, right? Shouldn't we all agree that FF7, the first FF7 which came out, isn't that a masterpiece? If they are changing something and putting it in the remake, there has to be a very good reason why they are doing that. Changing the story in the Final Fantasy VII Remake is like equivalent for them like cutting Tifa's hair, giving her smaller boobs, and changing her outfit. Like, she still is essentially Tifa, but she's not the same Tifa that you expect. But they did that with the story. They manipulated the story from the original so that they can sell you more episodic content. Think about like, why are they splitting this game up into parts? A lot of people, like even myself, originally thought that that's because they need the time to build the game from scratch, and that's a lot of work to it, and it's impossible for them to build the entire FF7 within one game. If you look at FF15, there is a definite proof that you can actually build FF7 Remake from start to finish and fit it in one game. But the reason why they chopped it up into parts is because it maximizes profit. If you play the original FF7, Midgar is only there to introduce the players to basic mechanics and tutorials of how to fight, what the world is all about. The world finally opens up after Midgar. That's why Midgar is not meant to be such a long section. That is what I mean by pacing. The original FF7 is like an Italian Naples pizza. It's fresh, it's perfectly paced, it has like the right amount of tomato sauce, it has the right amount of cheese, it has just the right amount of ingredients. And from the first bite all the way to the last bite, it leaves you wanting more. It's the perfect combination. They have franchises because of this pizza. This pizza is so good that every other country wants a piece. The FF7 Remake is a Chicago deep dish pizza. It technically has the same ingredients, but it's so filled up with grease that when you eat it, even though it reminds you of the original Naples Italian pizza, there's too much of it. And sure, a lot of people nowadays enjoy that kind of thing, but it's like so bloated, bro. Like, everyone in the remake has a backstory. Even like the Don's bodyguard, he has a backstory. Like, characters that never had backstories have backstories. So once you start to like put the focus on like a lot of like minor characters and giving them all backstories, it makes everything seem less important. And then when they retcon the deaths, nobody actually dies at the first part. Every decision they're making is a direct contradiction of like what makes the original story so good. Like, if you're gonna change something from the original, it better be a really good reason why. And I don't think like the reasons they changed the story or adding like backstories to certain characters, just because we as players want something from a game doesn't mean that adding it to the game is a good thing. So for example, here's the biggest argument I always had as a kid. I wish that I could have saved a certain character in FF7. I'm not going to spoil the name. You know, back in the day when that character died, I did everything in my power to try and study like how I could have saved the character, and there wasn't a way. The character was meant to die. And the reason why the director made that character die was because the director experienced death in his family. His mother passed away, and that death changed his outlook on life. It changed him forever. So he wants to like imbue that experience into his game, FF7, and that's why he made one of the characters' death mandatory, whether we like it or not. All of us players, we would love the option to save that character, right? But just because you want something, does it really truly make it a good idea? Would the story be as legendary if that person didn't die and you could have saved him or her? So all I'm saying is there is a reason why FF7 is so revered even to this day. And if you change something so fundamental like that, even in the beginning part of the game, it means that you don't really understand what makes FF7 FF7. That's the same reason a lot of like reboots, a lot of remakes are flopping. Like Star Wars, take Star Wars for example. Star Wars is like a soft reboot, right? Why does it flop? Because they forget the whole reason what makes Star Wars great. Star Wars is great is because it's the story of a journey of a hero. When you give a hero, it doesn't matter whether it's a girl or a boy, unlimited powers, they never have to work for it, they never ever fail, they never ever have their hands cut off, they never ever like lose. How do you root for a character like that? So that's why, in my opinion, the sequel Star Wars movies like Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker failed because they failed to understand what makes Star Wars great. Star Wars is not great because of the lightsabers. It's not great because of Darth Vader. It's not great because of the Jedi. Those are all the flash. The substance of what makes Star Wars great is friendship, is heart, is sacrifice, is doing the right thing even though it may compromise your life. You might die because of it. When you have all that substance, it adds a special meaning to the lightsaber. It adds a special meaning to the villains. It adds so much meaning to what being a Jedi is all about. So all of that is lost in the prequels and the sequels when it all became about the lightsaber, right? They forgot about the formula. What makes Final Fantasy VII so good, and of course I'm trying to like not talk about spoilers and all that, is the fact that there is a lot of twists and unexpected turns in the story, and the game is paced so perfectly well that characters that are not meant to be main characters are only there to serve the story. Think about Avalanche, for example. Like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. They were there to serve the story, to tell you like about like what Shinra is all about and why we have to stop Shinra, right? They were instrumental. They were not there to be all the way till the end of the game. It's like what they did with the Avalanche characters in the remake is the equivalent of you take a minor character from any game or Star Wars or whatever and you make them like more important than they should be. And people think like more content is good content. It's not. You sacrifice the overall pacing and feel of the game just because you want to like know about everyone, right? Sometimes mystery is very good in the game. You're not supposed to see Sephiroth that early. You guys know that, right? Like in the original game, Sephiroth was only a rumor. Sephiroth was known as a war hero. And there's a reason for that. Because when he finally shows up, it has been built up to that point. So you guys may not remember this, but in the old FF7 games, there was this giant serpent that chases you around the world map. And this giant serpent is so obnoxiously powerful that that serpent can wipe out your entire team just like that. Easy. And most of the time, you're trying to escape from the serpent. You do not engage the serpent. And later in the game, you find the carcass of the serpent impaled by a sword. And then your characters realize, could Sephiroth have done this? And this is like a scene before they even showed you who Sephiroth is and how he looks like. They built that moment. And when he finally arrives on the scene, it's earned. It's totally earned. So by them like not respecting that and like they're like shoving Sephiroth in your face every single second and hour of the remake, it's them not understanding why the original did it that way. So when you are a director and you retcon like so many story elements, cutscene elements, like characters, it just means that you fundamentally disagree with what they did back in the day. And of course people can argue and say like, oh yeah, you know what? Like I'm an OG player. I played the original and all I want is a new experience. Like that's fair, but that's not what a remake is. A lot of OG players got to understand that the remake is never about them. A pure reason to have a remake is so that your game is more accessible to people who have never played the original. Making the remake is making the game accessible in today's generation to allow people who have never seen FF7 finally get to experience the same game that we experience. A remake is there to solidify the legacy of the game, but a remake should be a remake. It should be everything that the original is, except for better like 3D models, better looking characters and whatnot. When you change like so many things in a remake, calling your game a remake is a downright lie. You market the thing as a remake. You know, remember the FF7 demo? The reason why people are so hyped up about the demo and why the demo did so well was because they gave you that slice of that demo that was beat for beat the same with the original. That is marketing deception. The players have no idea that in the game, there will be like very long drawn out sections that weren't in the original. And those were just placed there to pad out the game, right? Like for example, the robot arm thing, you know, long extended hallways, sections where you have to turn off all the lights and then go to this area and turn off that light. There is a reason why the original didn't have shit like that. That's because everything in the original was calculated to perfection to help you experience the game in a timely manner. It doesn't drag out sequences of sections sections that don't need to be dragged out. So that's why I really feel like FF7 Remake isn't really a remake. It's more like a reimagining, because although they stay true to certain sections and like maybe like the main set pieces, there is a lot of fuckery in between it. For example, the whispers. For example, characters getting killed when they were never killed in the original, only to be brought back alive. And this is going to be a minor spoiler for FF7 Remake. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm just going to tell you a minor spoiler. Nobody actually dies in the part 1. And people who did die are revealed to be alive at the end of the game. So when you do something like that, that is vastly different from the original, what you're doing is you're cheapening death. You're making things look inconsequential. Why should the player care about anyone if nobody is even going to die? Big Boss says, Oats, do you think you would have preferred a remaster instead of a remake? Okay, so the difference between a remaster and a remake is a remaster is just there to blow up the old game from a 240p to a 1080p. And you know what they do along the way is they enhance the frame rate. So they're not really like doing anything except making it sharper and clearer for the player. A remake is when they rebuild the character from the ground up. That means they have to model out the character in thousands of polygons that is like equivalent to our standard of what we think a next generation game is. That's a remake. But a remake also means that everything that they did from the original has to be carried over, because that's what a remake is. And a really good remake, in my opinion, is Shadow of the Colossus, where they rebuilt the entire world from the ground up. Like every blade of grass, they have to remodel it. They have to remodel every single Colossus. They have to remodel Wanda, the main character, the horse, everything. They have to rework the animation. They have to make it better looking. But why are they remaking Shadow of the Colossus? That's because the original game was so good. The gameplay was so perfect. The mood, the ambiance, the vibe, the atmosphere, you know, the reveals of the Colossus, the mystery around the whole world was so intriguing that people wanted to see it being remade. That's why remakes are very popular of like masterpieces. Why FF7 Remake is so hyped is because people remember it so fondly. People remember like the story, the characters. So what they did with the remake story is the equivalent of them changing how a main character looks. They can't do that to the main characters because that doesn't sell their game. The characters have to look exactly the same, or at least like close to what the original used to be, in order to sell the game. That's why imagine if they cut Tifa's hair short, they gave her like smaller breastises, they gave her a different costume. Everyone would be pissed. Why are you changing my character that I grew up with? But here's the funny part. People are okay with them fucking with the original story. Like, I see design and I see story as separate entities. Design has to be kept to its integrity if you're gonna remake it. So is the story. They go hand in hand. It's a marriage. If you don't change the characters, you keep it as authentic as possible, which people do enjoy. Why are you changing the story, which is very influential to what happens to those characters? So that's my problem with remake. They are not true to the original story. Helix says we could just play the OG for the original flavor. I expect the remake keep enough elements of the OG while changing enough to keep it fresh. Changing it means that you disagree with the decisions they make back then. If you agree something was a masterpiece, you can't disagree with what they did. So here's the thing. The reason why the remake is so damaging to the franchise is because a lot of people haven't played the original, right? That's number one. A lot of OGs who have played the original have forgotten what the original was like, right? That's two. Because the game was so old, the game is like, I don't know, like 20 years ago or something like that. Like, people remembering the games are getting lost in the ether. A remake is there to remind the people why the game was so good. A lot of people think like remakes are there just to like change things up, give you new shit. But all it really does, it muddies the story. People who have never played the original are going to think that the remake is being true to the original. So they're probably never going to play the original, because why play an old game when the new game looks so much better? And this is also a fundamental problem in our industry today. A lot of people can't separate the fact that when something looks really good, it can't possibly be bad. When you look at like FF7 remake characters and the environments and the way they like handle cutscenes, it looks like so good. It looks visceral. It looks like everything that we wanted when we were kids. So a part of our brain blocks off the part that it could be bad because they don't handle the story authentically. They add a lot of sections to the missions which don't ever have to be added. It bloats the game. The side quests are boring. They are not even there to enhance Everything that they choose to add in this part are there to only keep you there longer, so that they can justify the reason why they're selling this game episodically. It's such a crime to say that they can't build the entire world of FF7 when they have actually did even more in FF15. FF15 is a free roaming world. They have so many monsters, they have so much content, and you're telling me that you can't do the same treatment for FF7? You gotta chop it up to like little bite chunks. And here's the part. If you're gonna sell it in a bite chunk piece, why are you adding so much unnecessary bloating to your game? A lot of people may argue like, yo, this is content that I want, you know, I like it. But then again, my argument is just because you want it, it doesn't mean it's a good thing. Like wanting to eat like chocolate cookies for breakfast every day. I want it. I would love it. It's not good for you. You know what I mean? If you want your remake to be different from the original, that means you don't agree that the original FF7 was that great. I don't think the original FF7 meant that much to you. You think the OG is always with me and he can't be taken away despite me playing the remake. But that's being selfish. That's like you saying that you're cool with them changing the remake because you already know the OG. The remake is not necessarily for us. The remake are for people who have never experienced FF7. The remake should only be there to strengthen the franchise, to like remind people, or to make the game more accessible to newcomers and say like, hey, this is why FF7 was so special, right? And when they retcon everything, they add whispers, you know, certain people that are not supposed to die, and then they come back alive, and certain people who are meant to die, they don't actually die. It just means that the director is fundamentally disagreeing with the original director and his choices. It's a different game. You have to admit, FF7 Remake is a different game from the original. And only we know this because we are the OG. The people who are now playing it, they have no memory of the OG. They are gonna think that this is the thing that we experience. It is a totally different game. It is. So why call it a remake? Shouldn't it be called more like a reimagining? So I have a problem with deceptive marketing. And I think Square is very good at deceptive marketing. Why give you a demo of the remake, which is beat for beat the same with the original, only to change up a major part of the game down the line and to cut out like, you know, like they did cut out a major part of the game. They only kept it within Midgar. The original game, Midgar isn't meant to be that long because Midgar's purpose is to teach you the basics about the combat, the story, and what's happening. And once you leave Midgar, that's when the game actually begins. They took a tutorial section from the original game and blew it up into a big game. And because of that, it feels so bloated. It feels so like unnecessary. What they did with the remake is it's like the equivalent of like the Lord of the Rings movies and them not following the books at all. And they're like, yo, instead of Frodo throwing the ring, it's going to be like Gandalf. So instead of Gandalf dying, it's going to be Sam. And oh yeah, actually Sam doesn't really die. Sam actually lives. Oh, yo, hold up. Yo, Sauron is actually not that evil, bro. Sauron is actually a time-traveling dude because, like, he's trying to save himself. You know what I'm saying? And people would be like, oh, okay, so the books are this way and the movies this way. I get to enjoy, they're different, you know what I'm saying? It's not, bro. The movies should amplify what makes the books so great. People who enjoy the books are going to expect the same experience with the movies. Just like how when they tout this to be a remake, when they sell the demo as it's going to be beat for beat like the original, and when they change it up, that's marketing deception. There's a negative perception of people towards turn-based games. You guys realize that? A lot of people think turn-based games are bad because a lot of companies don't do turn-based games anymore. And even if they remake a game that is supposed to be turn-based, they switch the combat to be like an action adventure. And if you really think about it, a turn-based game is not that bad. It's actually very enjoyable. There is a reason why FF7 was turn-based for so many games, all the way up to FF10. And why are those games legendary? It can't be a coincidence. So if you change that gameplay aspect, I think turn-based is more exquisite in terms of the design, because a lot of things have to be calculated. Like they have to like know at a certain point when a certain monster has to get harder because the player has already leveled up. Like when I played the original FF7, I actually died at the bombing mission. That was actually how fine-tuned it was, it's actually so beautifully done. Like, for example, right, when I was fighting the robot in the bombing mission in the original, Cloud and Barrett's health were already 50%. But at that moment, both our characters have our limit breaks ready. So I had to make a choice. And the choice I made was to use the limit breaks instead of healing my characters. So when I used the limit break, the robot didn't die and he killed both Cloud and Barrett. That was what I call like intricate design. Because when I watched my other friends play that section, we all encountered that part where we were taught to actually heal over like doing high damage. All of us died. Most players who play the original FF7 will die at that part because it's a very teaching moment. That is why I believe turn-based is really good. But the problem with FF7 Remake is a lot of their decisions are made by one guy, Tetsuya Nomura. When you look at the older games, the director was Yoshinori Kitase, right? The producer was Hironobu Sakaguchi. And then the lead artist is Tetsuya Nomura. So everyone in their respective fields are genius. That's why they're able to make such a memorable game. In the remake, this guy is doing everything. What we're witnessing with FF7 Remake is what we witnessed with Star Wars Force Awakens. Star Wars Force Awakens has its flaws, but it wasn't so flawed that it alerted the alarm bells of what they were doing with the Star Wars franchise. This is what I think about FF7 Remake. Part 1 has a lot of flaws in my opinion, but it doesn't have enough flaws to alert the alarm bells of the series going downhill. Part 2 will be like Last Jedi. Trust me. And I'm making a judgment call again. I would love to be proven wrong by Nomura or if the game is really good, but I doubt it, man. Have you ever watched an anime, like whether it's like Shokugeki or I don't know, whatever anime you like, right? And have you encountered a scene in the anime where you feel like, hey, that's kind of fucking fanservy? They show you something in a scene where it shows you the character's pantsu, or it shows you the character being sexy and shit, or it does something that you don't necessarily think helps the story, but it's just there for fan service. I may not agree with it, but you may like it. Like, some people love the fan service. That's why they do it in animes. They make certain characters kiss. They make certain like girls have like compromising shots. They have like very like weird sexual like things. It's all there. Like, people who love those fan service things will like it. Just like how I think a lot of people will like the fan service in Remake. Making characters not die. Making characters more sexy. You know, giving certain characters more backstory. In my opinion, FF7 Remake is a fan fiction. It's not a remake. It should be called FF7 fan fiction. It's what we want and what the director wants. It's not what FF7 was. So it's not a good remake. It's not a good remake, but a good game. A good game is like debatable. I would say it has good elements, but if I really think about it, it's not a good game. The reason, okay, let me just say why it's not a good game. I can't just say it's bad without giving you reasons, right? The reason why it's not a good game is because the majority of the time you're holding up, you're mashing square. You may say like, oh, that's how you play it. No, it's how the game is. A lot of times when it comes to like monsters and stuff, you brute force more than anything in FF7 Remake. You can't do that in the original. I feel like it's a chore to play that game, right? A lot of sections didn't feel fun. Like, I had to like struggle so much to get to the fun part, right? Yeah, the fun part are fun. Like, maybe the boss fights are cool. You know, the cutscenes are cool. Those are fun. But the things in between it's too like lengthy. Okay, for example, like, try to think about that scene where Cloud is going to like steal the card of an old man who is Jesse's father, right? Remember the part where he sneaks into the room to steal the card? Why was that section so important to the story? If you're gonna add something that wasn't in the original, you have to have a good reason. Why is that section so important that they have to add it? It's not. They just add it because it makes the game longer. It gives Jessie the backstory, her reason for joining Avalanche. The way they executed it was really bad. That sequence where you're looking for the card is like really boring. It's like you're looking for clues. I mean, you can say it's her backstory, right? She has pictures on the wall. She has letters on for her dad. I mean, like, I play so many games, right? Like, I love to discover shit. You guys know that, right? I love to discover shit. That section was poorly handled. They could have done it another way. But I don't think, like, Nomura knows how to tell, like, a good story. Or know how to, like, make it exciting. And as, you know, as much as, like, you and me, we both would like to have Jesse have a backstory. You know, as much as we like certain characters to not die, it doesn't mean that what we want makes it a masterpiece. A masterpiece is a masterpiece because they do things that are necessary to the story, but not necessarily the things you want. Like, think about Game of Thrones, right? Like, try to name a lot of characters that you prefer not die. Like, I would prefer like character A, B, C, D not die. Honestly, like, think about the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. Like, oh my god, like, yo, I love so many characters. Would I have preferred them kept the characters alive so that, you know, I can have more content? Yes, I would have preferred them kept the characters alive. But would that have been a good story? Ask yourself. Like, the Game of Thrones is more memorable because they don't cheapen death. Death is such a major thing in games. Well, this is all my thoughts, and I'm just gonna preface this by saying that I have no problems admitting that I could be totally wrong. I could be just full of shit. I could just be like up in my own ass. You don't have to agree with what I'm saying. But if whatever I mentioned earlier has some tinge of truth and it hurts, you might want to look into that. That's all I'm saying. If whatever I'm saying doesn't affect your enjoyment of the game, it doesn't change your mindset, no harm, no foul, bro. I'm just saying, I could be wrong. I could change my opinion 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line. As I grow as a human being, I reserve the right to also say, like, my opinions can change. But as it stands, this is how I really feel about FF7. And if I'm going to be the only one on this hill, like everyone else is going to love the game and I'm going to die alone on this hill, at least you know I have character, right? Like, I stand by my convictions. And also, like, there is something I do agree with Helix. There is something like confirmation bias. Like, obviously, if you really love something, you're going to look for more reasons to love it. If you hate something, you're going to find more reasons to hate it. So in that sense, nobody is truly unbiased. Everyone does have some bias, including myself. So that's why I always try to preface it that way, that I am not the paragon of truth, right? You can choose not to listen to me, you know, but just know one thing. You're wrong.